Whether you're a professional athlete or a seasoned corporate executive, it is easy to enjoy a lifestyle where a paycheck is calling all the shots. But is that sustainable forever? Welcome to Tell Your Boss I Quit with Pete Goodekunst, founder of Good Financial Services and financial planner with Raymond James. Pete helps you financially bridge from the journey you've started through the life goals you've imagined. Sooner or later, by force or by choice, life takes turns. Listen as Pete discusses how to take charge and make your move on your terms with confidence.
We admire leaders. We follow them. Is the ability to lead others something that can be taught, or is it something that is innate? Well, Pete Goodekunst's guest has something to say about that. John Gronski is a decorated Army veteran who served for more than 4 decades as active duty Army and National Guard. As the CEO and founder of Leader Grove, John teaches leadership. And Pete, John's also an author.
Yes, I am so excited for our guest today. John is an author, The Ride of Our Lives, Lessons on Life, Leadership, and Love, and most recently, Iron Sharpened Leadership, Transforming Hard-Fought Lessons into Action. And we'll take a little bit of a dive into those concepts. John Gronski, Major General, U.S. Army, retired, is CEO and founder of Leader Grove, LLC. He's a battle-hardened warrior, a patriot, a father, and he's a great storyteller. So welcome to Tell Your Boss I Quit, John. And I typically introduce our guests and just say, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got here. But, you know, with you and your background experience, that might be the only question I get in for this podcast. So just give us a little synopsis on your life's journey and how you got to this point.
Hey, Pete, first I want to thank you for inviting me to be on your podcast. I've listened to them. They're fantastic, and I always get a lot out of them. So thanks for the invite.
Thank you.
A little bit about myself. I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania, small town outside of Scranton, Pennsylvania, 5,000 people, music. So, childhood, I was the youngest of 7. So I always had, I think that's one reason I was able to keep my weight down because, my brothers and sisters usually
they got to the table first.
they did. But anyway, went to high school there, went to the University of Scranton. I was into ROTC there. And that's how I got my Army commission, went on active duty for 4 years between 1978 and 1982, left active duty, came back to northeastern Pennsylvania on bicycles, by the way. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about that, but came back to northeastern Pennsylvania with my wife, Bertie, and our son on our bicycle trip, and got involved in the family business there for a while. From there, I transformed into working for a management consulting firm. So I worked with a lot of Fortune 100 companies, doing some executive coaching, and also implementing large, complex projects for utilities, telecommunications, healthcare, in primarily the Philadelphia region, but also other parts of the United States. And then went full-time with the National Guard back in 2011. That was after I was deployed to Iraq as a brigade commander. That occurred in 2005 and 2006. And by the way, Ramadi, Iraq at that time was a very violent, dangerous place. And I just have so much respect for the soldiers and Marines I served with who just did a phenomenal job there under very trying circumstances. But anyway, had the opportunity to command a 28th Infantry Division, 15,000 soldiers. It was a National Guard division, 15,000 soldiers spread across the state of Pennsylvania and into some other states near PA. And then spent the last 3 years of my career as the Deputy Commanding General for National Guard at U.S. Army Europe. So that was just another great experience, serving my last 3 years in Wiesbaden, Germany, but had the opportunity to travel to almost all of the 50-some countries in the U.S. Army Europe area of responsibility, and did a lot of work with our NATO allies, a lot of work with our other partners over there in Europe, spent some time in Ukraine while I was over there. And again, great way to end my career. When I left the Army in 2019, retiring after just over 40 years of service, I started my own leadership consulting firm because one thing about the Army does grow leaders, and had so many opportunities to lead and to mentor junior leaders that I wanted to continue to give back in some way. And I think the best way I could give back is by helping others become better leaders. And that's what I do. Love it. And again, just glad to be with you today.
Well, like I said, we could almost get a podcast out of that. A lot to unpackage there and a lot of great experiences. And our message here at Tell Your Boss I Quit is how to know you can thrive and not sacrifice in retirement. And what retirement looks like is changing so much from what it used to mean in the past. And so there you were, a major general, 2 stars, 40 years of service. You could have done countless things. You could have just said, hey, I've done enough. And you chose to give back, as you said. How did that career inspire and inform that work as a leader and a strategic coach? And I guess really what made you want to share that skill with the world?
Yeah, I think the thing is, in the 40 years of my service in the Army, I had so many great mentors. I had so many mentors, not only people I worked for, but people who worked for me also provided me mentorship. Our non-commissioned officers, for example. And I was just so blessed to have people like that around me who helped me out in my life and my career. And so I think that's really what inspired me, that I want to continue to help others. I didn't want to just retiring from the Army. I just didn't want to hang things up and go down to Florida and play golf for the rest of my life. Yeah. I wanted to continue to stay relevant and to help others. So really, it was because of the folks that helped me that I think has inspired me to want to help others.
So now your training today that you do in your leadership training, it's based on your theory of iron sharpened leadership, which is also the title of your book. And it relies on leading with character, competence, and resilience. So walk us through that philosophy and maybe give us some examples.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that could be said about those 3 elements of my leadership philosophy. When I talk about character, what I'm talking about are values. We really have to spend the time to identify what our core values are. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, I believe. The other element of character is trust. I think trust is really the lifeblood of any organization. If an organization is going to run effectively, there has to be trust going through the veins of that organization. And then the third part of character is care. And when I say care, I mean a leader has to care more about the people they lead than really they care about themselves. They have to put the welfare of those they lead ahead of their own welfare. I think that's really one of the critical parts of leadership. When I talk about competence, I'm really talking about leader competence. I'm not so much talking about the technical or tactical competence that comes with one's specific industry that they're working within. But I'm talking about things such as vision. A leader has to be competent enough to share that shared vision and purpose with those within their organization. I'm talking about decision making. Leaders have to have the courage to make decisions with less than perfect information. And then I'm also talking about communication. Leaders have to have good communication skills, verbally, body language, including listening skills. It's not only a leader talking, but it's also a leader listening. And then resilience is the third element. And when I talk about resilience, I'm talking about positive energy. A leader has to be optimistic, but it has to be realistic optimism. For a leader to be optimistic, there has to be a believable plan that goes along with their optimism. I'm talking about fitness, and I'm not only talking about physical fitness, that I do think physical fitness is important, but I'm also talking about emotional fitness, mental fitness, spiritual fitness. All of those elements of fitness come together. And then the last element of resiliency is vulnerability, which means a leader has to be able to push themselves outside of their comfort zone. And a leader has to make themselves vulnerable in other ways. For example, Leaders have to be able to share stories with others. When I say share stories, what kind of stories? A leader has to be vulnerable enough to share stories about the times they've made mistakes and how they were able to overcome those mistakes. Leaders should also be able to share stories about, how they got to the point in life that they're in. What did they have to go through to get to their current position of leadership? So those are some of the things I talk about when I talk about vulnerability. And last element of vulnerability, by the way, is really asking opinions of those you lead. As a leader, none of us have all the answers. That's why we have a team around us. And a leader has to allow themselves to be vulnerable enough to ask those who work for them, what their opinions are. So I'll just pause there for a moment, and I think we could maybe talk about some of those elements in more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting to hear. We just kicked off our vet fellowship program at the Union League last night. It's our 5th cohort going around. And it's interesting because we've got people transitioning from their military career into civilian life. And the last part you said and you said a couple of times already, is getting that 360-degree view. And so what's unique about our group is some of these are, E5 sergeants like I was when I served in the Marines. We have a couple of 06, which was a Navy captain and an Army colonel in the group. And we bring these people together. And what's unique is that younger NCO is sort of intimidated, I guess, in non-civilian examples. And we find that they have a lot to share just maybe because of where their post-military experience is to that point. And so I think that's really a 360-degree and being open to hearing all of that. And that's really why you seek out advisors in your life. But you go through all of those. So those are great examples, or great foundation of a philosophy. But your book is really about stories. Can you share a little bit of some stories about some of those examples that exhibit those things?
Yeah, in terms of character, there was a young Navy corpsman that I served with when I was over in Ramadi, Iraq. And it was in October 2005, the Marine platoon that he was providing medical aid for was out on a mounted patrol, and they were attacked with an improvised explosive device that was so powerful that it caused that 6-ton up-armored Humvee that he was riding in to turn over onto its side. And when the dust cleared, there were 3 wounded Marines laying along the roadside, and there was this young Navy corpsman, we'll call him Doc Leo. He had his leg partially trapped underneath that overturned up-armored Humvee. Some Marines came over to his aid, began to jostle the Humvee enough for him to drag his leg out from underneath. And I'll tell you, the wound was very severe. His leg was hanging on by just a tendon. And he put a tourniquet on his own leg, and then, without orders from anyone, began crawling across the roadway to render medical assistance to those 3 wounded Marines.
To others. How about that? Wow.
Yeah. And when the ground casualty evacuation vehicle arrived on the scene, when those 3 wounded Marines were loaded into the casualty evacuation vehicle, Doc Leo was in there. And Doc Leo refused morphine so he could keep his mind about him, so he could continue to render medical aid on their way back to the aid station. And when he got back to the aid station, actually it was our Charlie Med, which was a level of care above an aid station. His leg had to be surgically removed. So here was this young 19, 20-year-old man. And now he had to face life without his leg. And I actually talked to him before he was transported out of our forward operating base. And his main concern wasn't with the fact that he lost his leg. His main concern was, hey, could I continue to serve in the Navy so I could continue to serve with the Marines who I love so much? And as it turned out, he was medically retired, ended up going to college in California. But this is the cool thing. 2 years after that wound, he ran in the Army 10-miler in Washington.
No kidding.
State.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, he really just got back into life, didn't let this adversity overcome him. And he really displayed the values of the Navy and the Marines: honor, courage, commitment. And I think if those values were not really part of his being, he probably would have had a harder time, first of all, fulfilling his duty as a medical corpsman.
Hmm.
And I think he would have had a harder time adjusting and coming back strong in life. So there's just an example of how important values could be in our life.
No, absolutely. I through Raymond James, we frequent usually every year we have a run. I believe it's called Blades of Glory. And we, as firm Raymond James, makes a donation at the race. But these are all amputees, and a number of them are, I believe, from service injuries. But there's a lot of young children who participate in the race, and we raise funds for these running, prosthetics. And I think that's a true mark of leadership, because these young kids, the same as your story, they exhibit, I'm not going to let this hold me back. And that's just an inspiration. That's inspirational leadership too. That's remarkable.
Yeah. Pete, there's one other thing I kind of want to mention about values. And actually, a friend of mine, his name is Len Morella. He graduated from West Point, I think, back in 1958 or something, served in the Army. Retired as a colonel, and then he wrote a book, and the name of the book is In Search of Ethics. And it was really the way he wrote this book is he would go around and interview people about who had a reputation for being ethical and character-based leaders. And one of the people he interviewed was Coach K, who coached.
Okay,
me.
Sure.
And Coach Gronski, he graduated from West Point himself. Was a basketball player at West Point, and of course, gained so much notoriety coaching Duke basketball. But during the course of the interview, Len Morella asked Coach K, because Coach K had been talking about how important values are, and Len said to him, what do values have to do with winning a basketball game? And Coach K said, well, values and character have absolutely nothing at all to do with winning a basketball game. However, values and character have everything to do with winning a championship.
And he knew a thing or two about that.
Yeah. And I think that's just a great lesson, because a lot of times people ask me, well, how about toxic leaders? Don't toxic leaders sometimes gain success, and they're not a character-based leader. Their values are low values generally, not high values. And I say, yeah, now and then a toxic leader could gain success. However, in terms of long-term success, very seldom does a toxic leader gain long-term success. And I would even say a toxic leader never gains long-term success. So if you want to be a champion, if you want to gain that long-term success, that's where character-based leadership really comes in.
Great. Yeah. And I'm grateful that you're going to be able to stick around. We're going to jump to another part of our discussion here. But before we kind of wrap this part up, I'm listening to you. I was a Marine Corps veteran, Desert Storm. I read your book. Your stories really resonated with me, the one you just shared. But how does every man or woman listening to this interview, how do people, maybe I meet people, I could never have done what you did. And, I chose to do it. You chose to do it. We chose to serve. But how can they take these lessons of leadership and apply them in their lives?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think anyone could learn and develop to be a stronger leader than they are today. As a matter of fact, I'm still trying to learn how to become a better leader, truly. I really think it really comes back to the thoughts that we have. And I actually created a model which really leads into, hey, the thoughts we have, they could be negative thoughts, or hopefully they're positive thoughts. And we really have to work on the type of thoughts that we put into our head. It has to be a deliberate effort, but our thoughts actually lead to our values. And I think we have to be, again, deliberate about identifying our core values. What are our core values? And a lot of people never really thought long and hard about what their core values are and have written them down. I've done that. And I think it's very important to identify what are the 3 to 6 most important things in our life in terms of values. And then once we identify those values, we need to factor those values into the decisions we make. Think about that. If we should be factoring our core values into our decisions, how do we do that if we don't even know what our core values are? But I think that's extremely important to do. And then think about this: our decisions shape our actions, and then our actions reflect our character. And then our character is really what cultivates trust. So it all starts with our thoughts and our values. And if our thoughts are negative, if our values are low, because not all values are good values. There's some people who value disrespect. There's some people who value favoritism. There's some people who value racism. I mean, those are all low values. And so it all leads up to, what kind of character do we have? Is it a character that we could generally be proud of, or is it a character that really is character that is not fitting of a productive person? And again, it all comes back to, hey, if we have good character, we're going to be able to cultivate trust in our organization. If we don't have good character, we're probably going to destroy trust in our organization. So I think if people think in those terms, beginning with their thoughts and leading up to the type of decisions they make, the type of character that they have a reputation of having, things kind of come together.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. I think core values in financial planning, we talk about goals, but really you need to have your core values. That's going to lead you to setting the proper goals. We talk a lot about purpose, and you have to start with that foundation.
Yeah. It's like, what are your goals? Is your goals to have a strong family unit? Then you may be saving or investing in another way. Is your goal to continue a business opportunity? Is your goal to simply drive off into the sunset and retire? So I think that you're exactly right, Pete.
Yeah, those core values are so critical. So John, we're going to wrap it up here, but how can people reach you? How can they learn more about your messages and hear more about what you have to share?
Yeah, I think the best way is simply to go to my website, and it's a pretty easy website, johngronski.com.
Okay, we'll get that in the liner notes too, but I think we can remember that one.
Yeah, and then I have another website, leadergrove.com, and they actually both link to one another. But on my website, johngronski.com, I mean, people could read my blog. I have a YouTube channel that people get access from there. They could actually download a free leadership pamphlet that I put together, so no strings attached, just download this free leadership pamphlet. They could order some of my signed books, on my website. But there's really a ton of free leadership development resources on my website. So I would really like to invite people to visit johngronski.com. Also very active on social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. I post a lot of hopefully helpful leadership tips on those platforms, and people could visit me there as well.
All right, Pete, now we know how to reach John, but how can someone reach you?
Yes, well, you can reach us at gootfinancial.com. If you want to pick up our book, Tell Your Boss I Quit, you can go to tellyourbossiquitbook.com and you can order it there or through Amazon. gootfinancials.com, you can sign up for just a quick conversation. We can help you get connected to great people like John and other people in our network, and we would love to have a conversation with you. And I would love to keep our conversation going with John as well. So stay tuned, and please come back and check us out here at Tell Your Boss I Quit.
And just as Pete said, for the rest of this interview with John Gronski, follow the podcast. Very simple. And if you find this interesting, share with others. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for listening to Tell Your Boss I Quit. Click the follow button below to be notified when new episodes become available. To learn more about defining your financial purpose and how you can thrive and not sacrifice your spending in retirement, download Tell Your Boss I Quit by Pete Goodekinst. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the host and or guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Raymond James. This content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service providers with any questions you may have regarding your individual situation. Securities are offered through Raymond James Financial Services, Inc., member FINRA, and SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Raymond James Financial Services Advisors, Inc. Goot Financial Services is not a broker dealer and is independent of Raymond James Financial Services.